We're going to start talking about MLA for the rhetorical analysis assignment, but the first portion will be about general MLA formatting. So the first thing you need is your name. So Joe Student, Professor Skaggs, your class is English 121, and then that last three numbers helps me differentiate between the classes, so please include that. The date is, what is today's date? 14 April 2020. And remember, it does go in that order, not a different way. Technically, this should be double spaced. It is in Times New Roman 12 font. It is all the way over to the left against the margin, but then you want to spread it out so that it's double spaced. There we go. The title should go in the next line, so there's no extra space like it had at the beginning. We don't need that. And give me something more than rhetorical analysis. So you can make it think something creative, like king is the king of rhetoric. Before we get into the actual body of the paragraph, I want to show you how to get up here to put your last name and page number in the margin. You're going to double click up here. There's a spot in, I'm using a Mac, so its page number is here, but it would be in the insert pages, and then in your version, not my version, there would be page numbers there. So you're going to insert your last name here, the page number here, and then you're going to click back in the document and go back to the Home tab. The introduction, remember, is where the paper begins. We're going to talk about introductions and conclusions next class, but this is where the paper begins. You write an introductory paragraph, several body paragraphs, and a conclusion. At the end, you insert a page break, and I'll show you how to do that. That will force the cursor to the next page where you will post your works cited. Remember that a works cited page is required, or you will earn a 0 on the paper for inadvertent plagiarism. You should set the body paragraphs to automatically tab by changing the special formatting in the paragraph group to first line indent. So it tells you specifically right here how to do that. Since I'm using a Mac, I don't want to confuse you, but it's on the Home tab, paragraph grouping. That's this little grouping right here. There's a teeny tiny arrow in the Word version right here where you can bring up the paragraph grouping at the bottom of the section. Everything should be double spaced. We can also do that here. And everything should have a margin of 1 inch all the way around. You can check that by looking at the layout, the margins, and verify that it's 1 inch all the way around. Some versions of Microsoft Word, including older versions of Mac, default to 1 1/4 inches, so do verify that it's correct. Make sure that your name block is even with this over here, and that it isn't inadvertently indented here. Everything's, oh, we're already done that. The sample paper that I got from the course content in the MLA with citation section, hint, you could download that and use that as your template. You may use, has identifying information at the top left. This is typically double spaced for MLA. I'm okay with you keeping it single spaced if you want to save paper. Because we're doing only electronic feedback, it really doesn't matter at the current time. Let's talk in-text citations. How do you identify quoted material so you don't get busted for plagiarism? We use a standard format like MLA to identify quotes, ideas, or data that you use from another author. The basic format for an in-text citation is the author last name and page number in the parentheses after a quotation. And it doesn't say here on the text, but it goes at the end of the sentence. So if you had a shorter quote and then you had some of your own words, the actual citation, this part that goes in the parentheses, goes at the very end in front of the period of the sentence. Note that there's no punctuation here after the it goes after the parentheses here. The above quote citation is correct if we were reading the letter from a book or an anthology. This shows the reader that the quoted material is from page 12 of the Martin Luther King book. In our case, we are not reading the book from a book, but from a website. We're actually using it from The Atlantic. So rather than use a page number, we would use a paragraph number. So yes, you are going to have to count paragraphs. This is, by the way, an exception to MLA. So MLA no longer requires it. I require it from my students because I had students who were inadvertently failing to cite at all because they thought, well, since I don't have to list a page number, I don't have to put anything, and that is not true. So the above quotation that we had on the previous page, if we're looking at paragraphs, this would look like, well, confined here in Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement, end quote, space right here, King, space, PAR period, space, 1, end quotation, or in parentheses, and then the period after it. So remember, you do have to count paragraph numbers. If we're looking at an online source where you don't know where the paragraph is because it doesn't have this little half-inch indent, anytime there's a double space between lines, that's usually an indication of a paragraph. If you use the author's name in the signal phrase, that means somewhere in the same sentence, so not in a previous paragraph, but in that same sentence, then you would only need to list the page or paragraph number in parentheses. So if you said Martin Luther King Jr. in his letter from Birmingham jail states that he is in Birmingham, quote, because injustice is here, end quote, then you would just use PAR period space 2 and parentheses for the citation because you use the author's name here. One point of clarification, the first time you use an author's name, you use their full name, and every time after that, you just use their last name. So in other words, you would use Martin Luther King Jr. in Letter from Birmingham Jail once, and the rest of the time you would just use King. Information for in-text citations. We used to have a handbook. You don't have that anymore, but you can go to Purdue OWL. Just remember that we use paragraph numbers, and Purdue OWL is no longer requiring you to do that because that's not MLA. That's my way of protecting you guys from inadvertent plagiarism. If you're using an older handbook, just look at the MLA format. Be cautious because MLA did change in 2016, so make sure that it's the most updated information. And that MLA.org, that's where that little blue graphic that I showed you guys earlier in the semester comes from. And that is in the MLA module. So now that you understand in-text citations, I want to add something because you guys have the opportunity to do it for a video. So if you have a direct quote from a video, instead of doing paragraph numbers, you're going to use, let's see here, direct quote, and then you're going to use the author's last name, and you're going to use time. So let's say it's 1 minute and 10 seconds to 1 minute, 27 seconds. So you have to do the timestamp for a YouTube video. All right, so let's go back to where I was before. Now that you understand in-text citations, look on the next page for your Works Cited page. You can find this. We don't have the handbook anymore, but there is this file right here is in the course content in the MLA tab. And then you can use Purdue OWL, and they also have sample papers there. Note that the words Works Cited, and which I'll show you in a minute, should be centered at the very top of the page. The information is still double spaced. I have a lot of students who switch to single space in the Works Cited page. That is incorrect. And then instead of the tab at the beginning, which is this part, this space right here, you're going to use a hanging indent, which I'll show you how to create. You change that by highlighting the material you want to change. Bring up the paragraph dialog box, and then because I'm using Mac, I'm not going to physically show you, but it would be from the Home tab, paragraph grouping. So this is the Home tab. This is the paragraph grouping. And remember, there's that tiny arrow in the corner of the right section. You're going to bring up the paragraph group. And then whatever you have highlighted, there's a center section that allows you to change this into hanging or a first line indent, you're going to use hanging indent to get the hanging indent, and I'll show you how to do that in the next page. If you're citing more than one source, they are organized alphabetically by author's last name. You should only have listed as source the one argument or essay that you are using for your rhetorical analysis. So let's look here. If you have your cursor at the end of your last line, you're going to do insert, pages, page break, and it forces the cursor to the next page, and that's how you're going to write your in-text cite or your works cited page. Now, I've already done that in my sample, so I'm going to back up and undo that, but you can see my works cited page is already set up. I have some samples here. These are not the ones I'm going to use. Keep in mind that this version of Letter from Birmingham Jail is one that I used in previous semesters. It is not the one that we're using here. I copy and pasted information from Purdue OWL. We're going to start with the YouTube video because YouTube is very unusual. So you use the author's last name, which is Chimamanda Adichie. So you're going to do that first, and her last name is Adichie, Chimamanda, period. After that, the name of the YouTube video in this case is The Danger of a Single Story, period, and then in quotation marks. The container is where you found it, and we found this on YouTube. And then what makes this one different is that you're putting as a sort of other contributors, uploaded by TED, which everybody knows. It was uploaded 7 October 2009. No commas in there, comma at the end of the date, and then the location is the hyperlink of the video when you do share. Now, a couple things. The period goes at the end. There's a period after the author's last name, after the title, and then everything else has commas. YouTube is the container, so it would be italicized. I'm going to use Command I to italicize it. The entire thing should still be in Times New Roman 12 font, so Times New Roman, and then make sure you switch to 12. And then, whoops, it tried to go into that document. Hold on.
This is Jerry.
We don't want to listen to Jerry. So there's a couple things wrong with this, right? It should be a hanging indent, so we're going to do that now. It's different if you have a Mac. It would be, oh, that's not right. File, or not file. Man, it's been a while. Format, paragraph, and it'll bring up the paragraph grouping. And then this, where it says special, we're going to change that to hanging indent. We're going to change this to a 0. The line spacing should be double. So special is hanging indent by 1/2 inch. Both of these should be 0s, and the line spacing should be double. Click OK. And now we're seeing that hanging indent that's the opposite of a first line indent. I'm going to erase these template that I picked up from Purdue OWL. And then we're going to look at, we obviously don't have a regular book, so I'm going to erase this one. This is what it would look like. This Bernstein is what it would look like for an online source, although the access date is no longer required. We're going to do letter from, we're going to move Adichie to the top in a minute. I'll show you how to do that. But our Martin Luther King Jr. is a little bit different. So we've got the author right, we've got the title right, but the container is not the King Encyclopedia. The container is the Atlantic. And then there's a comma after the container. The date that King that originally published this was 20 April 1963. We no longer have Stanford University as our source material. It's actually from the Atlantic, so we've already given that credit. Now we just have to give it the location, which is the hyperlink. So I'm going to copy and paste it into there. Notice when I did that, it maintained the weird font. So we need to make sure that we go back and change it to Times New Roman 12 font. For my class, and this is different by teachers, I let the software break this wherever the software is going to. So if the software leaves you with a big giant white space here, go ahead and leave it so that this lines up properly here. All right, we have one other source potential, and that's Joe Goodwin Parker's What is Poverty? And so first we use her name, period. What is poverty? Question mark. We don't have a container. So originally we were using an outside source and we had a different container, but right now we're using it from D2L. So we have no container, no version, no number. We know from the preface that it was published in 1971, and then all we need is the hyperlink to the course content, since that's the only thing that we have to tie it together. Notice it automatically did a hanging indent. If yours doesn't, you know how to do that. But it changed the font to Calibri. So we're going to change it back to Times New Roman 12 font so they're all the same. Now I'm using a Mac, so this next part, well, first let me add a period here. The next part may not look exactly like this on a PC, but what I'm going to do is take these and alphabetize them. And see in the paragraph grouping, this thing that says A to Z. If I click that, it's going to reorganize these based on the author's last name. I'm going to do it by paragraphs, which just means anytime you hit the return between citations, that's where it's going to alphabetize. So now I have them alphabetical by author's last name. This was just a placeholder, so I'm deleting that. This is what your MLA Works Cited page should look like. You will only have one of these. I did the others so that everybody has access to the same information. That's it. You can repeat any of this video that you need to clarify. You can also look at the sample MLA format file that's in the course content under Introduction to Composition or Intro to Comp in the MLA with Citations module. You have time in the next class to ask points of clarification, and you'll also have a chance in peer review. Have a good rest of your day.